Welcome back. Former Congressman Barney Frank has died, who you see next to me now. Frank, a longtime Bay State representative, was 86, dying from complications of congestive heart failure. Our Washington correspondent Emma Wolfhorst has more on his life and legacy.
Barnett Frank was born on March 31st, 1940, in Bayonne, New Jersey, outside of New York City. It was two more words starting with the letter B that would impact Frank's life: Boston and banking. Moving to Beantown from Bayonne, Frank graduated from Harvard University in 1962. PhD studies in political science were interrupted by jobs with Boston's mayor and later with the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Returning to Harvard for a law degree, Frank turned to politics, serving the state legislature for 8 years, then elected to Congress in 1980. A progressive Democrat, Frank opposed many policies of then-President Ronald Reagan. 7 years later, at the height of the AIDS epidemic, Frank became the first member of Congress to voluntarily confirm he was openly gay. After this politically consequential moment in 1987, he was reelected the next year with 70% of the vote. Remaining a fierce advocate for LGBTQ+ rights, Frank made his biggest legislative mark later in his career during his time as House Financial Services Committee chair during the 2008 financial crisis. Frank helped shepherd several major pieces of legislation, including Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008, better known as the bank bailout. He also helped author the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. The 2010 law, which includes his namesake, reformed the banking system following the Great Recession. In 2012, Frank made history again, marrying his longtime partner, James Reddy, the first member of Congress to do so. The U.S. Supreme Court wouldn't legalize same-sex marriage for another 3 years. Frank retired from Congress in early 2013 after serving 32 years in the House. A liberal icon and trailblazer, Frank would stay active in politics after retirement, notably being present on the House floor when Congress passed the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022. In Washington, I'm Emma Wolf.